Democratic senators are currently attempting to block any vote on any type of legislation that does not deal with the government shutdown. However, there is some legislation coming out of the Senate that I want to make sure that you are aware of. The Intercept did a great job in reporting on S.1 in the Senate, and it is mostly a Middle East policy proposal, but there's a very important part of it that could have an impact on our First Amendment rights. Now, Marco Rubio authored this legislation, and you should know what it says. So in the 2019 GOP-controlled Senate, the first bill to be considered, S.1, is not designed to protect American workers, bolster US companies, or address the various debates over border security and immigration. It's not a bill to open the government. Instead, S.1 will contain a provision to defend the Israeli government. The bill is a top legislative priority for AIPAC. Okay, so far, doesn't seem that bad, right? I mean, it's bad that they want to protect another country as opposed to taking care of Americans. That's bad, but it's actually about to get a lot worse.
Yeah.
Okay. 26 states have enacted some version of a law to punish or otherwise sanction entities which participate in or support the boycott of Israel, while similar laws are pending in at least 13 additional states. So this has actually brought up a huge legal issue because there's the boycott of Israel, which is a movement within the United States to raise awareness about what's happening to Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Now, whether you want to participate in that protest or not, that's your choice. But that should be your choice, and it should be protected by the US Constitution, particularly the First Amendment, right? You are supposed to be able to protest, you're supposed to be politically active, you're supposed to practice free speech without the government violating that. And what this bill would do is essentially punish you if you have the audacity to participate in that boycott. So there have been 2 federal courts so far that have ruled on these bills and have declared them to be unconstitutional violations of the First Amendment. That makes sense. And so Marco Rubio in the Senate wants to basically pass legislation that would nearly make it impossible for federal judges to deem it unconstitutional. So he wants to beef this up in a way that would make it possible for the government to come after you if you decide you want to participate in this boycott. So a restriction of one's ability to participate in collective calls to oppose Israel unquestionably burdens the protected expression of companies wishing to engage in such a boycott. That's according to a US district court judge. Okay, so that was one of the rulings. Also, last year, Senator Cardin introduced a bill that would have criminalized participation in international boycotts of Israel. And it was on the verge of passing with significant bipartisan support until the ACLU got involved, sounded the alarm on how gravely unconstitutional this bill was. So again, this is an effort to punish Americans for practicing their First Amendment rights, and secondly, to protect another country and the citizens of another country over the citizens of the United States. For me, this is not about Israel. Yes, this is the political issue at hand, but I think the broader issue is actually a much more important one, which is our First Amendment rights and our ability to practice those First Amendment rights, our ability to protest something that we do not agree with.
Yep. No, you're absolutely correct. It does not matter what nation it's targeted at in terms of boycott. This is a matter of our First Amendment rights and our ability to actually actively engage and choose what boycotts or what activities we wish to engage in. And by passing this kind of legislation or even trying to put it out there, it really encroaches upon our First Amendment rights. And also it's just a waste of resources because eventually it's going to get through the federal courts. And even if it were to make its way to the Supreme Court, the First Amendment, it's been around for a while and it's been pretty sound in this area. And for the fact that they're still trying to push this, it's wasting resources, wasting time, and really just limiting us as citizens. It shows that they don't care.
Right.
This has been carried over since the last Congress and Senate. So whenever you have your first legislation, they make sure it's a signature thing that this Congress is hanging their hat on it. This is what they're about. This is what they're headed towards. As the last Senate and the Republican-controlled Congress, they pushed for the tax cuts for the corporations. We knew that was what they're hanging their hat on. Cool. Many Americans have found out how disastrous that was, but that's still their thing. All right, fine. So this is the signature legislation for the beginning of this Congress with this Senate. Trying to push this through because in the middle of a government shutdown, by the way, because this is what they're concerned with. I went to the AIPAC site to look at their key points about this. Near the end of the whole breakdown of several different points about how this makes sense to continue this legislation, they said, under this legislation, companies and individuals would be barred from refusing to conduct business with Israel. However, they would remain entirely free to boycott Israel on their own volition. Someone should talk to Texas and the school teacher, I think the pathologist, Bahia, Amawahi. So she was fired because she didn't sign on to what they wanted to do there. That was an individual that wanted to continue boycott, but wasn't allowed to. So somebody's lying.
She's not even participating in the boycott. So this is a teacher in the state of Texas who would work for the school district on a contractual basis. And it was time to renew her contract, and the contract specifically indicated, remember, this is a public school district, meaning that it's government funded, taxpayer funded. This school district does not have the right to violate your First Amendment, okay? And so she refused to sign the contract because there was a portion of the contract indicating that the person signing it was not to participate in this boycott of Israel. And she was like, what? First of all, I'm Palestinian, and so I just can't, based on my own principles and my ethics, I can't sign on to this. But secondly, why is this included in my contract to be a teacher? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so she ended up losing her job as a result of this. And so people are actually feeling the ramifications of this very unconstitutional policy in various states, as many as 26 states that have enacted this type of policy.
Yeah, and it's very much a tyrannical approach in curbing your First Amendment rights, because that's kind of the first step of things, of forcing you to decide, actually no, to just not like or to like a certain country or a certain thing. That's the first step in terms of really gaining control. And also, this is, again, the First Amendment. Your right to choose who you want to support and not support and to be vocal about it. This is a core element, and for them to be willing to really curb our rights, it's wild. And you are so right, Jayar, in terms of saying that this is what they're coming out with. This is the first thing out of the gate. This should speak volumes to the American people that they want to take away your First Amendment rights, and this is the first step.
So one other part of this that I came across this morning was, Marco Rubio authored this legislation, and there have been critics, rightfully so. People who genuinely believe in our constitutional rights have been criticizing this. And so he is going on the defense, arguing that anyone who's against this is anti-Semitic.
That's the line.
That is a tactic, by the way, used by individuals who want to intimidate you from speaking the truth. This is, yes, Israel is involved in this, but the bigger picture involves the rights of Americans, the constitutional rights of Americans. And so don't allow, if you want to raise awareness about this, don't allow anyone to intimidate you or put you in a place of fear by calling you anti-Semitic, because you're not anti-Semitic for simply pointing out that this is a gross violation of our constitutional rights.
Let's always also point out, you talked about how Ben Cardin was part of the bill that was trying to criminalize it. That's a Democrat. So this crosses all. This is a bipartisan bill put forward from the last Congress to do this, because maybe instances like that, when they're saying, hey, you're gonna be considered anti-Semitic if you do this, and we're gonna make sure you get voted out, or we're gonna make sure we don't get you any kind of campaign funds. Everything, 100% of everything when it comes to bad policy from our legislators is from their funding. It is the number one issue in America, because these entities, how many people in America, I'm sure there's tons, but how many people who voted in the midterms, who maybe didn't vote before, who voted their whole lives, know what AIPAC is and knows who they influence and how they influence them, and that the very end of this entire breakdown of this particular bill is lying to you because there's actual people that have been affected by it.
Absolutely.
Do you know that? No, you don't really know, because you don't have time to go through all that. You just heard, hey, those anti-Semites are voting against something that has anything to do with Israel.
And by the way, one of the arguments that Marco Rubio is making, to bolster his nonsense about how critics are anti-Semitic is, they're perpetuating the stereotype that, Israel controls America. No. First of all, it's not about Israel controlling America. It's about special interest groups controlling America. And AIPAC happens to be a special interest group. Special interest groups, money in politics, corruption in politics, that is a huge problem, regardless of what special interest group is playing a role behind the scenes. And so, yeah, guess what, Marco Rubio? You're controlled by special interest groups, whether it's AIPAC, whether it's the NRA, or any other special interest group that exists out there that's funding your campaigns. So you're controlled by them. It's not anti-Semitic to point that out. It's very obvious.
It's weird. Saudi Arabia's been controlling us in many ways for decades. Is it anti-Saudi to voice out against it? No, we don't use that approach because that doesn't work.
Right, and it's amazing how real anti-Semitism takes place in America on a regular basis, right? With white supremacists marching and saying things like Jews will not replace us. I mean, where's the Republican Party in denouncing that? That's anti-Semitism.
Oh, but they're fine people.
Right.
They're fine people.
On both sides.
It's disgusting.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.